The Jackets by Clarence Chance. Suan was up late again. She was reviewing and rewriting her graduation speech when she heard sobbing. She silently opened the door to her room and tiptoed towards the living room. Through the half-opened door, she saw the dim figure of her father kneeling by the couch, his head buried in the cushion, trying to drown out the sound of his sobbing while his hands flailed in the air. The crying was growing louder, and Suan wondered if it would wake her mother. Her next thought was to rush to him and ask what was wrong. But she knew that if he knew she had seen him so vulnerable, his heart would break. Even though her hands and feet had frozen when she saw him kneeling and crying, her emotions hadn't, and she was unable to hold back the mighty sob that spilled out of her now. "Somebody there?" the startled, crying man shouted. He was drying his tears vigorously in his white t-shirt. "Billy?" he called, suggesting hopefully to himself that it might be Suan's cat. Suan thought to turn and run, but in her haste, she might knock over something. So she tiptoed backwards, gently closed her door, and climbed into bed under the sheet. With her body covered from head to toe, she was wondering what on earth could break this proud, mighty man so to make him cry like a baby. She vowed she would find out. At least 50 or 60 times, he had promised himself that he wouldn't even bother to ask whose children they were. Yet no, the question seemed to fly from his lips as if he couldn't stop it. "Whose children are they?" he heard himself say. He felt a tingling feeling in both legs, and he knew it was nervousness and maybe fear, with anger mixed in too. But his wife, Lorian, didn't answer. Suan, her heart beating fast, placed her left ear near the closed door. At times, she could hear their voices but couldn't catch exactly what they were saying. But other times, she could. She heard Edward say, "I gave my life, my everything to you. I sacrificed for you, Lorian. And this is how you repay me?" He swallowed hard. "Shame!" he said next. "You choose to shame me and the children and yourself and your family." His voice drifted away, and it seemed to stop without his input. It was making way for tears. Lorian came now, and she tried to hold onto his hand, but he pulled it away, pacing around the room, and she pacing behind him. "We were living a happy life, Edward. Why you choose to do these tests? Why?" she muttered. "We were living a happy lie," he shouted. "That's it, a happy lie." Edward Johnson was silent for a while, and the woman cried softly. For in her mind, she couldn't afford to wake Suan. Then firmly and slowly he said, "I hope you know things will not be the same. I intend to tell Suan and Donovan after the graduation. Then I will divorce you. Please don't destroy our happy home." She was crying loudly now. Then she was beating his chest with both hands. "No, no, you can't leave me." The door was being opened, and Suan darted for her bedroom, and her mother darted for the living room. Suan heard how the bawling subsided, becoming a whimper, and then would rise again. It continued like that for a very long time. The confused child did not fall asleep that night. The Loving Hands Primary School was a mile out of Kingston. The school was doing well now that Principal Roosevelt had taken over. She was a small woman with a large voice and a large ego to match. She feared God, but no man. And it was she who had identified greatness in Suan. She said absolutely nothing could prevent her from becoming the leader of the country. When Suan won the international spelling competition, it was further confirmation that she was marked for greatness. But what made her truly great, according to Principal Roosevelt, was that she was good at the sciences and at the arts at the same time. And that, Principal Roosevelt quipped, was as rare as an honest politician. It was therefore no surprise when Suan Johnson was chosen to be the valedictorian of the graduating class of 2021. On the day of the graduation, Suan was pure emotion, and those seated close to her said they saw her shaking as she was ending her speech. "For there's no gift greater than a father's love," she said. "It keeps one going. It straightens one out. It has many folds of protection. It verifies one purpose. It has equal importance with oxygen for one's life and well-being. All these things a father represents and more. And there is no other father I would want in my life than the one I have." She looked into the crowd and said, "Will Mr. Edward Johnson please stand?" The confused man stood up slowly, and there was deafening applause all around him. The plan was for Edward to drive Donovan back to the university where he boarded, and Lorian and Suan would travel home together. Donovan was doing remedial classes to make up for courses he had failed. As Suan entered the car, Lorian started. "So, it was your father who birthed you then? Oh, so you don't have a mother? It was your father only that brought you to where you are?" Suan said nothing. "Ungrateful!" Lorian said bitterly. "Children and men are so darn ungrateful!" And she raised her index finger to Suan's forehead and pushed her head backwards in rebuke, and she bared her teeth in anger. Just then, Principal Roosevelt arrived, and Lorian wondered if she had seen when she had landed her finger on Suan's face. She thought she hadn't when the principal told them she was looking all over the place for them. She complimented the magnificent speech Suan had given and said lastly that she, Lorian, had much reason to be proud of the work she had done with Suan. With that said, Lorian nodded, acknowledging the compliment, and drove away. Lorian had said more than once that her 20-year-old son Donovan was born with a sixth sense and discernment, rare in one so young. Today, that sixth sense and sense of discernment pushed him into the office of Mr. Patrick Long. Long was a one-time practicing attorney and former law professor, but now Jamaica's richest man. He had traded law for an investment firm and was very good at it. Lorian had once been a student of Mr. Long, but he was still surprised when her son had called with a request to see him after his classes today. It could be said that the office was obscenely large. There was a full-sized couch in one corner. It would be excellent for him and those girls up by the university, Donovan thought. And then he wondered if Mr. Long did any of those sorts of things in his office. He quickly concluded that he did because he wasn't really that old. In one corner, there was a dining table, and at the other end, a large fish tank with colorful fish. On his decks were pictures of his family, his two boys, and the young daughter, whom Donovan would see at the university sometimes, though they had never become friends. And of course, a large picture of his wife. But the picture which stood out the most was a picture of Mr. Long, when he was around 18 years old. In that picture, Donovan saw his very own face. Mr. Long wrapped up the call he was on now and courteously said, "Mr. Johnson, how can I be of assistance?" "Mr. Long, I will cut to the chase. I have more than a small suspicion that I am your son, and I would want to be placed in your will before it's too late. Before your family says I'm mad or greedy or plain stupid and then try to get rid of me. I think we could do a test and start this thing out because I'm confident things happened between you and my mother when you were younger." "What did you say, boy? Are you out of your flipping mind?" Mr. Long was incensed. "As a matter of fact, sir, I think my mind is the clearest it has ever been," the young man replied calmly. "What made you think you can come into my office and speak to me like that? Out!" Mr. Long shouted. "Out, you crazy self-righteous bastard!" And he opened the door and pushed Donovan out. Just then his daughter, Denique, was entering through the door to come see him. After school the next day, Donovan went to Duke Street. He had come to find a lawyer to take the case for him. He wanted to force Mr. Patrick Long to give a sample for a paternity test. He visited several law firms, and they were unwilling to take the case. Finally, at the corner of Duke and Barry Street, he saw a woman. Out of confusion and frustration, he started to tell his story, and she said, "Come with me." She was Mrs. Marvelyn Lynn, and she was a lead lawyer for a benevolent society called Redirecting Fathers. It was financed by the Europeans and was a bid to build a better family life for Jamaicans. Because of the high prevalence of absent fathers and so-called Jackie children, the society had gone awry, she said. The initiative would be highly beneficial to Jamaica, and that's why she undertook her responsibilities with this righteous gusto, she told Donovan. But at the same time, she was reminding herself of her mandate, for she knew the power Patrick Long wielded. She added that a new law had recently been passed in the House that if it could be shown that there were reasonable grounds where a paternity test could be sought, then a man had to submit himself for this test or be sanctioned by law. It was true that some men would be inconvenienced by this, but if children's father can be delivered to them, then a man's inconvenience was a small price to pay. She told him that this law would criminalize a woman who falsely declared a man to be the father of her child while having knowledge it might not be so. Such women, she said, would be tried in a court of law and be sanctioned. Donovan was surprised. He said he did not know that there was such a law. But Mrs. Lynn told him that it had just been ratified and it would soon percolate through society. Then she asked what probable grounds he had to think that this man was his father. He told her how the man that was considered his father all his life, Mr. Edward Johnson, had done the paternity test because of an article he had read stating that according to lab data, 2/3 of Jamaican children were given to the wrong men, claiming they were the fathers. He stated that he had further bet a colleague that he was sure he wasn't in the 2/3, but had received the shock of his life. He told her how Edward had brought them to the lab to give samples under the guise of checking out their family tree. Donovan told her how at first he thought he felt some sort of kinship with Mr. Long when he was only 10 and had gone to a function at the company's office. He had asked his mother if he was his uncle. He had recently learned a police report had been filed against Mr. Long's wife, who had abused his mother when she had found her and Mr. Long in a car late one night on the university campus when his mother was a student and already married. Mrs. Lynn decided to file the documents with the court. "Well, if he is your father, he must stand up to his responsibilities," she said. Donovan was told to go with the phlebotomist to get the blood work done, as the office was self-contained with a laboratory. As he was leaving Mrs. Lynn's office, he heard people talking about the news she had just told him. One man was saying, "Yes, I bet you, women will stop giving jackets now. I bet they will give children to the right father now." He was referencing the headline in the Daily Afternoon tabloid. Women can be imprisoned for giving jackets. At the newspaper stand, one man was shouting, "It should have happened long time. My brother take care of a boy for 17 years. And when he tried to bring the boy to live with him overseas, he found out through paternity test that he was not the father. The woman them too wicked, man." And then a man who was passing overheard the conversation and stopped abruptly. He told them his dear friend had been jailed 3 times for child maintenance and then found out he wasn't the father of the child. He said, "They should do the paternity test at childbirth and end this nonsense once and for all." He rolled his huge brown eyes, emphasizing his disgust. The taxi drivers were shouting it out. The news drifted into Papine Square. The university president and his staff were angry and confused, and people milled about, quietly chatting amongst themselves. Now and again, some sort of wailing broke out as blue police lights flickered in the early morning darkness. "How could this happen at the university?" people were asking. "Do you know the person? Which faculty is he in? How did he die?" "His name is Donovan Johnson. He does architecture. He was shot in his dorm room," were the answers. Then people were saying nobody heard gunshots, and they all concluded the shooter had used a silencer on the weapon. The lead detective, Malcolm Anderson, was standing now in Patrick Long's extravagant office. He had refused a seat offered by Mr. Long. He had come here to do serious business, he told them. Seated in the office were Patrick Long, his wife, 2 sons, and his young daughter. The detective told them that a young man had been murdered, and that it was his job to find that murderer, that he would leave no stone unturned to effect that end. He said that the young man had claimed to be the child of Patrick Long, therefore being entitled to all that a child would from a rich father, and that would have made some of the people in the room very unhappy. Furthermore, by making such claims, he had brought the family's name into disrepute, thereby creating the potential for financial loss. He sternly said, "If you have anything to tell me, do it now, for hereafter the law shall show you no mercy." But nobody had anything to tell him. Mr. Long said to him gently, almost kindly, "Detective, I understand you are trying to do your job, and you must look under every stone. But you won't find any murderer here. You take care of yourself now, and good luck." For the next hour, Detective Anderson interviewed each member of the Long family individually and promised they would hear from him soon. Anderson went next to the home of Lorian Johnson. Lorian's eyes were blood red. Her eyes and face were swollen from the many bouts of crying for her firstborn. Sorrow had drained all energy out of her. Anderson expressed his deepest condolences, and he asked her if she knew of any enemy that Donovan might have had. She told him there was none. He went quiet, almost seeming to truly care, but then said a most uncaring thing. "The young man, by coming out publicly with your infidelities, made you look really bad. That might have been grounds for," but Lorian stopped him in his tracks. "Are you suggesting I murdered my own son, sir?" "What a horrible thing to say," she continued. "My dear lady," the detective said, "I've seen worse than that." "I guess you have," she said, after a moment of silence, seemingly searching for something else to say. She then told him she was busy, and he left saying she would hear from him. The body of Donovan Johnson was to be cremated, but this caused a big outcry. "Why would they want to burn up his body?" some asked. "That wasn't a part of our culture," they said. "Why can't he be given a proper funeral like we used to?" they protested. But Lorian showed them the text message Donovan had sent her 2 years earlier, stating that if he died before her, he wanted to be cremated. He had said then that he did not trust family, friend, or foe, and that he wanted nobody crying for him at his funeral, after they had treated him so badly in his life. Thus, after the completion of the autopsy, Donovan Johnson's body was cremated, with the 2 witnesses he had asked for, his mother and his sister Swan, who would now scatter the ashes on their way home. Famous vlogger Christina Fox posted certain particulars of the Long case on her vlog. As usual, people wondered how she came by such sensitive information. Some said it might have been leaked from the lab, or maybe it was from the court office where the papers were filed. Others remarked that it might have come from the people involved in the investigation of the young man's murder. Some dismissed the revelations as malicious rumors, saying no vlogger should be allowed to defame a man of Long's caliber without offering evidence. Some said vloggers should be stopped, but others argue that to attempt to muzzle vloggers would be read as an attempt to muzzle the masses. Under the proposed divorce agreement, Lorian would buy out Edward's portion of the house. Edward would then live at his deceased mother's house. Swan was there one evening when the Child Protection Agency, aided by the police, came and seized her. She had been on the veranda playing with her cat Billy when they made their way in, presenting some sort of document to a screaming Edward. They told him that the child was not allowed to live with a man who was not her family in the way it was being done, and that the child's mother had reputational issues, so the child could not live with her. So it had fallen to the state to provide a settled existence for her. Edward was livid. Principal Roosevelt was livid. Well thinking people were livid. The Child Protection Agency would be sued. The judge declared that the issue was a difficult one, even though it was the express wish of the child to live with the male. Such a thing could not be treated lightly. He said there were certain moral issues surrounding the mother, which the court couldn't disregard. As it relates to the school principal, such action would need to be dealt with by an act of adoption. But considering all the facts and the overall stability of the child, he would allow her to be kept in a government-run organization for a month, after which a progress report would be released to the court and then he would make a final decision. But a week later, there was controversy, for it was alleged that wards of the state were being abused in state care, and it must have prompted the judge because he called back all parties to the court and said that he was making the ruling that he thought was best for the child. He ruled that the child would live with Edward Johnson. The Child Protection Agency should provide checks every 30 days. Lorian was being slaughtered on social media and in society at large. Because of that, she decided she would have a press conference. She said they tore her down openly, and it was now her time to speak openly. The room was packed to capacity. There were bloggers and vloggers and a few journalists from mainstream media. But there were also people from the general public as well. Arguments were circulating that Jamaica's richest man had been involved in a love triangle. Then there were whispers that the love child had been murdered. And so they came for the so-called scoop. Lorian revealed that she was married very young, and like a lot of young ladies, she was enamored of an older, very sophisticated man, and she had made a mistake. Her second child was the product of rape, she said, and she couldn't keep it back anymore. And what was to come from this revelation, she did not know. But the time had come for the truth. She had been asked to coordinate a corporate event where a popular singer will perform. Lorian told them that she was the singer's #1 fan. Late one night after rehearsal, the horrible act occurred. She was then asked if she would go ahead and say who the rapist was. "I will," she said defiantly. Lorian said she had been threatened that if she spoke up, her family would be killed and her career would be destroyed. And that is why she had not come forward. She acknowledged she had made a mistake early in her life. But who hadn't? The only mistake she had made with the singer was that she was a true fan and had thought he was somebody. "But who is the rapist?" the woman asked again. Lorian paused and then seemed afraid. But she had already built up herself, for it just had to be done. "He is celebrated singer Cushane Waters, popularly known as Boxer M." Now came the uproar. "Liar!" they shouted. "Mongrel!" Somebody shouted from the back of the room. "It's because your husband found out you gave him 2 jackets. Now you want to ruin the artist's career." A thunderous male voice barked. Then one woman stood up shouting, "Yes, it's happening again. A black woman is trying to tear down a successful black man with lies." Others were calling her Jezebel, and then she started to cry. She had come to accuse Jamaica's greatest and most loved singer of a heinous crime, and in doing so, had become Jamaica's most hated woman. That evening, a news release put out by Boxer M read in part, "Serious accusations have been leveled against me. I categorically state that these accusations are patently false. I state further that I do not know this person." But a vlogger presented a photograph of the accused and the accuser together on his vlog. So later, another press release came from Boxer M. "I must report that I do know the accuser. In fact, we had a brief relationship." But all acts were consensual. Later that night, Lorian was shocked to receive a call from the Minister of Consumer Affairs and Affairs of the Aged, who said she was coming to see her. I want to say, first of all, that I believe every word you said, Lorian. Secondly, I want to say whatever I say to you tonight cannot leave this room. If it does, I will deny I ever saw you. Lorian was worried. She sat down. You have my attention, she said. You must recognize my position, the minister said. I could never say certain things publicly. She paused and seemed to think, then continued. That scoundrel raped me too. I begged him not to. I begged so hard. I was only 20 and a fan just like you. I was already married just like you. I discreetly found out that my husband was not my daughter's father, but I passed the child on to him just like you. I gave birth to the child of a rapist. Oh God! The minister was sobbing now. And still, I had to love her. I had to love her. If my husband or daughter ever finds out, it's the end of me. He threatened me too. I was so afraid, so afraid. Too many regrets, too many secrets, she said. And there was murder in her face. She stopped crying and wiped her face. In this bag, I have $1 million. It is to help you to sink him, whether in the court or by whatever means. Sink him for us. The minister motioned with her hands under her head and asked Lorian if she understood what she meant, and Lorian did. For the minister had come here to solicit murder. Lorian didn't bother to wonder how a woman in her position could be making such a request, for she knew what pain can do to the mind of a woman, how it tortures and abuses. She knew the pain this woman carried all those years, and she was sorry for her. Lorian gently hugged her and said, "There is grief and anger and hate in me, but not murder. What I want to do is find out who murdered my son, get back my daughter and restart my life. When the time comes, karma will deal with that wretch." And at that moment, her phone rang. It was Swan. "Oh, my darling, my angel. How happy I am to hear your angelic voice," Lorian said. And the minister, with her legs heavy from fear and rejection and anger and pain, dragged herself to her car, taking the bag with the money. "Mommy, how are you?" the concerned girl asked. "They have been saying nasty things about you on social media, Mommy." "Swan, don't pay attention to any of these things. Mommy is fine. Remember, we are strong people. I know you are being treated well." "Mommy, I love you so much, and I miss you too," the child said with emphasis. "Your mommy loves you too, darling." And then Lorian asked to speak to Edward. Swan shouted, "Dad!" And Edward came to the phone. "Hello, sir," Lorian said. "Hello," Edward said without enthusiasm. "How are you?" "Good." "Edward, can you find it in your heart to forgive me? I want my family back. Take me back, please. I'm on my knees. My life is nothing without you." But Edward replied in a flat voice, "If that is all, I will hang up." He did, and she fell to the ground, crying again. The police would lay no charge against Boxer M because there was no evidence, the police chief said in responding to a journalist at the police weekly news conference. He further stated that no formal report had been made, and that paternity only proves fatherhood and not rape. When Lorian was asked by a friend what action she would take, she said she was just plain tired and that all she wanted now was her family back. By that time, conscience had pushed Patrick Long to do the paternity test. He said it was conscience and not because the court had issued papers to him. The result proved that indeed he was the father of Donovan Johnson. He did not attend work for 2 days, for he said he had failed in his responsibilities. But if Lorian had just hinted at it, he would have honored his obligations. But he wouldn't blame her because he understood where she was coming from. Nonetheless, it was a sad time for him, a very sad time, and he told Lorian so. Suan was one of the highest scorers in the primary school exit exams, so she was placed at a very reputable high school. She had insisted that both Lorian and Edward should be there with her on the opening day. They were getting to meet the teachers, but Principal Clark came to meet them, as Suan was the spelling champion of the world. In her speech, the principal asked Suan to stand so everybody could see her. But a little later, Suan had gone to the restroom. Just when she was leaving, a fellow new girl leaned into her ear and said, "Jacket." Suan stormed out, told her mother, who in turn whispered to the principal, who was still seated on the platform. She gently pushed aside the Dean of Discipline, who was speaking at the podium, and started to speak herself. "Let me say this. Parents, I want you to hear me well. If you don't teach your children to act in accordance with the rules of this school, they won't stay here. Let no one tell you otherwise. This is my school, and discipline will be maintained. The little girl who was rude to her schoolmate in the bathroom should go to her parents, confess what she did, then come to my office and we will take it from there." The child, frightened that she had been outed, did as she was told. She apologized to the principal, to Suan and her parents, to her own parents, and promised it would never happen again. The next day, Lorian was invited to the office of Patrick Long. "I know you're not one to take handouts," he said. "The truth is, I owe you so much. More now, considering the new revelations about Donovan's paternity. I want you to leave that dead-end job and come work for us. And please don't say no. I will pay you this." He wrote the salary on a piece of paper and handed it to her. My, the shocked woman said. "And which job deserves this salary, sir?" she hastily asked. "You will head the benevolent arm of our company. You will create a proper image of the company. You will offer scholarships to needy Jamaicans, and you will be the adjudicator of our main scholarship, the Donovan Johnson Scholarship for architecture students. I want to give back to Jamaica, Lorian. Come partner with me." "Yes, I will take it," she said, smiling, pretending not to see that he was becoming emotional. "Can I tell Edward?" she asked next. Of course, Mr. Long told her. "Can I suggest that you have never grown out of love with that man, and neither has he? It's not my business, but I thought I should say that." A World Cup qualifier match was on at the National Stadium, and Mr. Long had invited Edward, Lorian, and Suan. Jamaica was leading 1-0 at halftime, and over the public address system, the announcer was saying, "There is a special and very important announcement coming up sharply, so all should pay attention." Lorian was shocked to hear the voice of Edward saying, "Lorian Kennedy, will you marry me?" They recorded his voice, she realized, and now before her he was on his knees while spectators seated near them were holding up placards which had the words, "Lorian, please marry me." Suan was jumping up and down, excitedly saying, "Say yes, mommy!" Then they were shown on the giant screen, and the whole stadium was applauding. Mr. Long too, from his vantage point in the main box. Of course, Lorian said yes, but some were soon criticizing Edward on social media. They said he was a clown. Others said he was a useless simp. They questioned how a woman could pass off her 2 children as his, and he finds out, divorces her, and now only months after would be marrying her again. What nonsense, they said. But many people said that those very things proved that this was true love, and that they should be left alone because they deserved to be happy. The wedding was masterfully put together. Patrick Long saw to that. He got the best wedding planner available. There was no greater sight on earth than to see a family reunited. The food was amazing. Everybody agreed on that, but they could not agree on who was happier, Lorian or Swan. Lorian's gown was stunning. The unmarried woman saw it and hoped one day they could get equally lovely gowns, while the married one saw it and wondered if gowns that gorgeous were around when they were getting married. She received a car as a present. It was brought by a tow truck to the reception, wrapped in red bows. Lorian ran to Mr. Long and hugged him, as she knew only he would operate like that. Days after returning from her honeymoon, Lorian was at home going through some documents when a man arrived. He was from the court office, he said, and he had come to deliver papers for Mrs. Lorian Johnson. "That is for me, then," she said politely. And when she read the document, she stamped both feet onto the floor and sent out a mighty shriek. "Enough!" she said loudly. "Enough!" The singer, known as Boxer M, had just served court papers on her. Later that day, he was on a radio program, and when asked about the lawsuit, he said he couldn't divulge everything because it was a legal issue. He said he had already provided a paternity sample. He wasn't suing for full or partial custody of the child. All he wanted was access to his daughter, and that was not too much to ask. He said the mother hid his child from him, and that everybody knew he had no children of his own, but takes care of many. However, there was something special about getting a child for oneself. He told the radio announcer that they had a consensual relationship, and he would have provided for the child if the woman had told him. The listeners agreed, and they started texting the program to say the woman was wicked, as she knew what she was getting into, and she knew one of the possible outcomes could have been pregnancy, and she should have told the artist about the child. Lorian made a frantic call to the minister. She just got to see her, she said. They were to meet on Barbican Road. The minister was already there. Lorian parked her car and climbed into the minister's car. "I think you know why I've come," she said. "I know want what you asked for. Let us work together to get rid of this evil man." But the minister was reassuring her now. She extended her left hand across the shoulder of Lorian and patted her gently, saying, "You have won back your happiness, so please don't spoil it. Remember you told me karma will get him?" Lorian nodded. The minister continued, "Well, I've come to believe that karma will ultimately get him, darling. I only want to know one thing. Did he really rape you?" Lorian was annoyed and was about to say yes, and the minister said, "It's okay. I have my answer." With that, Lorian stepped out of the minister's car. After months of being pressured, Detective Anderson finally called Mr. Long to say he had a breakthrough and he was coming over to discuss it. "I must confess, I did not expect this outcome," he said. "I suppose this is mighty shocking then, sir," Mr. Long said. The detective was standing again, after initially sitting down at the request of Mr. Long. "You see, the security system was disabled at around the time of the murder, and unfortunately no security officer was posted near the dorm room. But the telling evidence was there all along. A minute camera the young man had set up to capture his sexual escapades had captured the murder. It was only after tenacious computer forensics that a file, carefully hidden on the young man's computer, was found. This had been missed earlier. You see, a silencer was used on the weapon, so that's the reason nobody heard it. Now all the mystery has rolled away." Then he turned suddenly, faced Mr. Long, who was now standing, and said, "Please take a seat, sir." Mr. Long complied, and the detective took out his phone and started the video. "Oh God!" Mr. Long shouted. "Oh my dear God!" Then he was falling from his chair, then regained his seat, then falling again. He composed himself and called his driver to fetch his daughter, Danique, at the university. When she arrived, her father showed her the video, and she fell to her knees. "I did it for the family, Daddy. I did it for you. When I heard that imposter boy saying the things he said, I knew I couldn't let him destroy the family name. So, I did it for the honor of my family. You break my heart, Denique. You truly break my heart. The boy was no imposter. He was my son, Mr. Long said. That dirty little Roma couldn't be true, Daddy, Denique said, now tearfully. Denique, eventually, I would have admitted it to you. Your mother and your brothers. I was waiting on the right time. That boy came from my own body. And if I knew before, I would have treated him as a son was to be treated, Mr. Long said, with glossy tear-filled eyes. Denique struggled to her feet. She seemed to be reaching for her father, maybe to hug him, maybe just to touch him, but he stepped back a little, seemingly not knowing how to react himself. Daddy, she shouted shrilly. Although she tried to summon more words, no word came, only tears, then wailing. Her father said, This policeman has come to arrest you. She fell to the ground on her back. Mr. Long knelt over her, his tears falling on her face and mingling with hers. And now the policeman bent low, held one of her hands with both of his, gently pulled and said, Come now, young lady. Denique rose slowly to be led away. By this time, people were pouring out of their offices, wondering what was happening. But the detective did not handcuff her as he led her away. Lorian's cell phone was ringing, and a dread swept through her. A phone call at this time of night was never good news, she thought, and Edward stared beside her. Then the voice came on the line. It was a low but satisfied voice. It was the minister. Don't say anything. Just listen. I want you to be the first to know. Karma has done its work. And she hung up. Edward asked who it was, and she told him it was a wrong number. At this time of night? Edward asked. Those people are crazy. Then he went back to sleep, while Lorian lay there for a very long time. In the morning, the news was coming through. The international press had picked it up. Legendary Jamaican singer Boxer M died last night. He had attempted to overtake a car and ended up running off the road into a ditch. Details would follow later. The Minister of Culture said that a great Jamaican had left us. She likened the Boxer M to a great painter and said he painted masterpieces of life with his songs. She said he was a hero and heroes never die. Soon enough, there was talk that someone had deliberately run Boxer M off the road, resulting in his death. However, for the moment, the argument was only a rumor.